Numerous people have sued Monsanto, which has now been purchased by Bayer. Bayer, in this case, actually is a bit in the position of your editor, who apparently was not at the Journal at the time this fraud was perpetrated on them, but has inherited responsibility, legal responsibility.
Although they have plenty of sins in their past.
Wow, do they?
Oh my goodness.
Wow, do they? But nonetheless, Bayer made a mistake. It purchased Monsanto, including all of their liabilities. And
Oh, wait, also, he's not my editor. Go on.
all right, fair enough.
Sorry, start over. The court trials.
Okay. What happens is, and the first one of the trials that was won was actually one, he was not the only lawyer, but Bobby Kennedy was one of the lawyers on the initial trial in which a verdict against Monsanto for cancer caused by glyphosate was won by a guy named Dwayne Johnson.
Do we know
I
when?
do, but I've forgotten. It was
Ballpark? Like first decade of this? Like right after this got published? Or
yeah, could you look it up?
what do I look up though? I don't know.
Dwayne Johnson verdict against Monsanto. But I want to make a point to you about what's going on here. So the general pattern is this. Individuals sue Monsanto for injury done by glyphosate. Oftentimes, these are people who work with a lot of it in an agricultural context, or they're landscapers.
This is 2018.
2018. So they sue.
Oh, wait. So Dwayne Johnson isn't the lawyer. He was
the plaintiff.
Yes, the plaintiff.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember this. Yes, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. He got a ton of money from them.
Well, that's what I want to get to.
Okay.
He got a ton of money. I think something like $280 million.
39.2 million. This is, again, just first pass ChatGPT. 39.2 million in compensatory damages and 250 million in punitive damages.
Except, guess what?
The punitive portion was later reduced by the trial judge. On appeal, the final award was significantly lowered.
20 million.
To no reductions to around 78.5 and later to about 20.5 after appellate decision.
Okay, so the jury looked at this guy's terminal cancer and awarded him $280 million. It was reduced later by 2 successive judgments to $20 million. He is still alive, and he was given 2 years to live when he was first diagnosed. He's significantly outlasted his prognosis. But nonetheless, this pattern where a huge award is given by the jury in the aftermath of one of these cases, and then it is later reduced, has been the consistent pattern with judgments against Monsanto. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why that is.
So I want to hear that, but what do we know about whether or not that tends to be a pattern with very large punitive damage awards by by jury trials that are later reassessed in appellate court?
That is exactly the pattern.
Across all.
Yeah.
Not just Monsanto.
Right. So a jury of your peers hears about what some awful corporation did to you, awards you a huge amount of money because you're in a state that has punitive damages. Not all of them do. As you will remember, we were limited in our ability to sue the state when the Evergreen meltdown happened to us because Washington does not have punitive damages. Right. Punitive damages are designed to punish the offending entity so that it will stop with the egregious behavior. Now, I'm going to argue that we do them incorrectly and that there's a fix that needs to happen in order for the system to work, but I'll get to that in a minute. The reason that these judgments get reduced is because of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Okay, didn't see that coming?
Yep. You want to put the 14th Amendment up? So the 14th Amendment, for those who have forgotten,
which includes
was
me,
part of Reconstruction, and it was designed to protect slaves, former slaves. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
So
You don't really see Monsanto in there, do you?
No, and I don't remember what you said about what part of the 14th Amendment is being used to justify the minimization of jury judgments.
It's the equal protection clause at the end. Okay? Now, the reason that
I don't see it yet.
because it's preposterous.
Okay.
Okay? What's going on here is that corporations, you'll remember, are persons, corporate personhood.
Mm-hmm.
A widely misunderstood property. The reason that corporations are persons, and they do need to be persons, is to bind them. You need to have the ability of a corporation to sign a contract and then to be able to enforce that contract against them. So that personhood was designed to make them persons for purposes such as contracting and suing. It was not designed to give them the protection that is granted to all citizens.
Yeah.
So what's going on here is that the courts have a kind of pseudo-sophistication in which they look at the ratio between compensatory damages and punitive damages, and they consider things above 9-to-1 to be excessive. Now, this is insane.
That still doesn't get you to a reduction of more than an order of magnitude of total damages awarded.
I can't get you there myself either.
A ratio problem doesn't get you anywhere close to that reduction.
Well, the general property is reduction based on a skewed ratio of compensatory damages, which are scaled to the harm that was done to you, and the punitive damages. Now, let's talk about why. So, hold on. There are three things that are taken to be reasons to reduce these verdicts. One is the degree of reprehensibility of the defendant's conduct. Two is compensation to civil criminal penalties for similar misconduct. So they compare to other penalties, and the ratio between punitive and compensatory damages. Here's the problem. There is a general flaw in our legal structure, which is that penalties are scaled to the offense, not to the capacity of the individual or the corporation to endure the penalty. So Bill Gates does not suffer the same fear of getting a speeding ticket that I do, because there's no speeding ticket you could give him that would make, the amount of time that he has to sit there with his window rolled down is way more expensive to him than any ticket he could be given. So there are no effective speeding tickets for Bill Gates, right? In fact, the best thing you can do is draw out the process while you've got his window down. That'll hurt him, right? So he
doesn't drive himself.
The juries are responding to the evil done to these people. Dwayne Johnson got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from glyphosate, having not been told that that was a possibility, and in fact being assured that it wasn't, right? The jury was incensed by this and gave him a big punitive award, and then the court said, well, that big punitive award is out of scale. The problem is, what you want punitive damages to do is to alter the future behavior of the offending entity.
Yeah.
You want Monsanto to not just simply budget for lawsuits. You want them to stop selling glyphosate because they know it gives people cancer, right? The award has to be large enough to do that. So the jury's ire is actually right, and the courts are wrong to be reducing these things, because what they do is they turn it into a cost of doing business.
But I'm curious about the larger trend that you say is true, which is that across the board, you have large jury judgments being reduced in the appellate courts.
Yep. That is, the big guys own the system. And my claim is that we need a wholesale rethink of this process. Punitive damages are vitally important to the system doing what it's supposed to do. It should not be a cost of doing business when you cause somebody cancer. It should cause you to rethink whether or not you can afford to have your product on the market at all. In order for that to be true, these things need to be scaled to the degree of evil and the size of the entity being punished, right?
And I remember us discovering after our lives had blown up on us and evergreen had turned on us, that Washington didn't have punitive damages, perhaps being told by our lawyers who were, very good at what they did, but they're like, there's just not much we can do.
Yep.
I don't think that either of us looked into at the time, and maybe like, why do the states vary so much with regard to the ability to enact punitive damages? And I would have guessed that historically states that were tending to vote blue would be more likely to have punitive damages, and so was surprised to find that Washington state had none.
Yeah, I don't know what the history is. It's bound to be interesting. But when it's corporations we're dealing with, the 14th Amendment should not apply. This is not, the founders gave corporations personhood to bind them, not to enable them with the rights of a citizen.
Did the founders do that?
Yeah, they did.
Because there was some
they had to.
There was some interpretation more recently that got a lot of attention.
Oh, it was the Citizens United decision
in the 90s
which
or something.
Corporations' right to free speech is like equivalent to that of an individual. So it's preposterous. In order to make the system work, A, you need to have punitive damages. B, they need not to be scaled to the amount of harm. I mean, the harm to Monsanto needs to be large enough that they don't do harm to Dwayne Johnson in the way that they did. Mm-hmm. So you need massive punitive damages. Now, it may be that some of those punitive damages should not go to the person who was harmed, right? To the extent that the court awards, I think part of the reason that we hiccup on this is that it's not obvious. If you punish Monsanto at a level that makes it think twice about what it's doing, it's not obvious that that's relevant to what the person who was injured. The person who was injured deserves some of those damages, but in order, if it's possible that those funds should go elsewhere. In other words, the general harm that was done to the public, maybe it should go into a fund for other people who've been harmed, something like that. I'm not arguing all of it. Some of the punitive damages.
I think you're asking for trouble.
Really?
I mean, you're effectively talking about socializing the damages.
No, what I'm talking about is the purpose of punitive damage is to punish. And
it's punitive versus what?
Compensatory.
Compensatory.
Compensated for harm.
Yeah, but the strong allergic reaction to socializing of funds that have been earned through trial, in this case an actual trial, I feel like I don't think any good will come of it.
Well, that's possible, but my feeling is if the court's purpose is to punish, it is not obvious that the best way to punish it is to transfer that wealth to the individual who was egregiously harmed. In other words, if Dwayne Johnson is representative of 1,000 people who never sued because they couldn't or because their case was less clear or whatever it was, then it's not obvious that the huge windfall, and mind you, he didn't get a huge windfall.
Yeah.
He got $20 million for his life being radically shortened. But the huge windfall that has been scaled to the size of the thing that you need to punish, it's not obvious that that is relevant to the individual who's been harmed to a certain extent. He deserves to be more than made well, I believe, but the purpose to punish has to be maintained, and it may be that the public is actually less enthusiastic about punitive damages because they see it as a windfall.
But I don't see any evidence the public is not enthusiastic about punitive damages, because you report that jury trials keep on producing these big judgments.
Well,
and then it's the appellate courts that reduce them. And,
right.
I do wonder how it is that a state like Washington has no punitive damages at all. But I don't see any evidence that what you're saying is true. And I think the idea of, yeah, we're going to let the guy who's obviously harmed go to court and take all of the risk, and then we're going to claw back some of that for, unspecified others. Like, that just sounds like socialism at its stupidest.
No, I think actually the pattern is the one I'm describing, and it makes sense because if you're in the jury box and the prosecuting attorneys are presenting you with the evidence that not only did Monsanto distribute a dangerous product, that it knew it was dangerous, that there was a discussion about whether or not the public needed a better warning and they decided against it, if you have that evidence in front of you, it incenses you. That's very different than the public at home reading whatever they're reading that hears that somebody, got I forget what the judgment was for the hot coffee that got spilled in the drive-through window. But you're like, hey, wait a minute. But then you look at the case and you're like, oh, actually, once you see the discussion where somebody knew that somebody was going to get scalded and decided that's fine, how bad could it possibly be? You understand why these punitive damages are there in the first place, but the public in general doesn't. They hear these giant numbers, and there's
so I don't know the legal system at all. It's an entirely social construct, and it's entirely human construct, and so not being able to derive anything from first principles, I only know what I know, and it's not much. And you are proposing, you are noting a problem. Which you say is widespread, not limited to things like Monsanto judgments, in which juries of one's peers come down with large amounts of punitive damages, and later on those get reduced substantially by appellate courts. That is a problem. That probably also the media follow-up on the reductions is much less than the original.
Yep.
Than the original, and so people don't even recognize that actually Monsanto wasn't really slapped. Hardly. It was like a mosquito at their foreheads, as opposed to a major problem. So something, I have no idea what, is something is amiss there, and how might you solve it? I don't know. I think you are proposing that there is another problem. I don't yet see that there is that problem. Maybe there is, that the public gets a little squirrely about the idea of large punitive damages delivered to individuals. There's a problem that you see. I don't know that there's a problem, and you proposed something of a solution that is kind of vague, and I feel very concerned about the solution being proposed.
Okay. I have proposed a solution. It's not vague. You're concerned about one nuance of the solution. The solution is we have to fix the belief that the 14th Amendment protects corporations from egregious...
No, but
Hold on. So we need to have punitive damages scaled to the size of the entity that has engaged in this bad behavior, and that they have to not be protected by the 14th Amendment in this way. That's illogical, right? It was not designed to protect corporations in this way. So we need large punitive damages, and we need corporations not to be immunized by the 14th Amendment because it's illogical.
And so the justification by the appellate courts comes back to the 14th Amendment each of these times?
Yeah, the Equal Protection Clause. So that's just, I think the answer is it's obvious what this does when you have these massive judgments reduced on appeal. What it does is it has Bayer, the owner of Monsanto, which has suffered substantial loss in its valuation after buying Monsanto because these judgments are mounting and it's looking for relief from the federal government, wants to be freed from responsibility. It's still selling the stuff, right? So here's my point. Yeah. You don't want that liability. Stop creating new victims. It's obvious. And what do we know about the judgments that were ultimately handed down? They weren't big enough. You're still selling the stuff. Yeah. Right. So,
and they're probably still developing. I don't know. But my guess is that they're also still developing the Roundup Ready crops, which are, the crops that are particularly resistant.
Which then use tons of the stuff, which puts the very people...
The idea of Roundup Ready means bring it on.
Yeah, it means that you can afford to drench the crop in this stuff. They're also developing this insane use where they use it to desiccate crops right before harvest, which means that people ingest a lot more of it. So the point is, the bad behavior continues unabated. These judgments need to be bigger, not smaller. right? Reducing them has left this behavior in place. And so this does, for me, connect back to, the Journal, in my opinion, I know it's not yours, but in my opinion, covering its ass here. My feeling is this stuff's got to hurt way more if it's going to stop. That's my point. It's got to hurt way more. The natural level at which it needs to hurt has to be more if we're going to get people to stand up and block bad papers or retract them quickly once they find out that they've been had, which is what we need in the public. That's what we're owed.